Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Know Your Rights in Banned and Free States. We're proud to host today's conversation as part of Whole Women's Health Alliance's 10th anniversary celebration and conversation series. Our moderator for today's event is Sonia Miller, Managing Director of Whole Women's Health Alliance, who will start us off with an introduction to our conversation and our panelists.
We're having this conversation at a time when abortion laws are shifting rapidly across the country. And with that shift has come a tremendous amount of confusion, fear, and misinformation for patients, for providers, and for communities trying to understand what the law actually allows. Today, we want to focus on something simple but powerful: knowledge. Understanding the legal landscape, understanding patients' rights, and understanding what providers and advocates can and cannot do under the law. We're incredibly fortunate to have a panel of leaders who bring expertise across clinical care, legal strategy, and regulatory compliance. Let me briefly introduce our speakers. Amy Hagstrom Miller, founder and CEO of Whole Women's Health and Whole Women's Health Alliance. Marc Hearron, Senior Counsel at the Center for Reproductive Rights, and Janet Crepps, a retired reproductive rights attorney. Thank you all for being here. And Marc, before we begin, please feel free to share a brief disclaimer about legal advice.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. The information that is provided in this webinar is provided solely for informational purposes only. No information shared in this webinar constitutes legal advice or creates any attorney-client relationship. Please contact an attorney if you have any questions about how any state's law applies in your particular circumstances. And if you are a healthcare professional and would like to speak to an attorney about your circumstances, the Abortion Defense Network may be able to help find an attorney for you, and that is abortiondefensenetwork.org.
Thank you, Marc. Amy, I'd love us to start off by grounding in the work of our organization. Could you begin by telling us a little bit about Whole Women's Health Alliance, who we are as an organization, and the role you play at this current moment?
Sure, happy to. Thanks everybody for joining. We've got some brilliant lawyers here, so I'm going to make sure that I don't say too much. But Whole Women's Health Alliance is celebrating our 10th year since we were founded in Austin, Texas, really in the middle of our big Supreme Court case that Whole Women's Health brought against the state of Texas. And we have really our overarching mission is to revolutionize the abortion care landscape in the United States. And we really do that in three different buckets. Our biggest bucket of work is to provide fabulous abortion care, oftentimes in places where there's restrictions or where there have been bans historically or where access is challenged. Secondarily, we have a really strong commitment to shifting the stigma and shame that has been weaponized by primarily the religious right against abortion over the last decades in this country, and to really counteract that with education work, with press and media work, with communications work, to shift the shame and stigma, but also to create a new lexicon for us to talk about the experience of abortion in this country. And our third bucket of work is what I oftentimes refer to as kicking against the pricks. In that bucket of work lives our advocacy work, our litigation work, our fighting back against bad restrictions, our testifying against bad bills, and really kind of counteracting some of the negativity around abortion that has been fabricated a lot in this country by our opposition. We have two clinics for Whole Women's Health Alliance right now. One is in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. One is in Charlottesville, Virginia. And in those clinics, we provide medication abortion, which is about half of the abortions we provide. We also provide first trimester and second trimester abortion care services. Both clinics go to 20 weeks and are expanding to 24 weeks over this next year. So that just gives you kind of a snapshot. We also serve quite a few patients out of state now since abortion has been banned in many parts of the country. So our Charlottesville site serves at least 30% of our patients come from out of state. They're coming from Florida, Georgia, both North and South Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia. And in Minnesota, it's grown from about 5% pre-Dobbs to close to 15, if not a little more, percent of our patients now coming into Minnesota, primarily from North and South Dakota, from Iowa, from Wisconsin, and also even Nebraska. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the patients I've seen in both of those clinics recently who've come from those other states and the kind of questions they have, and how it's changed the care that we're providing in both Virginia and Minnesota to really think about our patient base being much more broad in both of those communities.
Thank you so much. One thing we hear repeatedly from both patients and providers is that the legal environment feels incredibly confusing. So I'd like to open this next question to the whole panel. We are in a moment where laws are shifting rapidly and confusion is widespread. From your perspective, what is the single biggest misunderstanding people have right now about abortion access in banned states versus protected states? And Amy, let's start with you, and then Marc, and then Janet.
Sure. I'll just start by saying people don't realize that abortion isn't illegal everywhere. I realize that's a double negative, right? But like banned state residents can still have abortions. People who live in places where abortions are banned can travel, they can get funding. It's still legal for those people to have abortions in places where abortion is legal. I would say that's the simplest way to say what the biggest confusion is for most people.
So you asked the single biggest, but I'm going to say two things. One is I think people don't realize that we are right now, the United States is a tale of two countries. So, we had before Dobbs, there was a federal constitutional right to abortion that helped a lot of people and that was substantial. But right now, right, I actually don't know the number of states off the top of my head. I should that have near total abortion bans. But in huge parts of the United States, abortion is protected now even stronger than it was before Dobbs. There are many, many states that have reproductive freedom amendments or other constitutional amendments in their state constitutions or other protections in state law that actually provide much stronger protections than the protections that we had under Roe. So we all focus on the bans, but I think it is important to also recognize where we have made a lot of progress. And then the other thing I think is there's just a ton of confusion about exactly what states can ban, what actually is illegal right now, what actually you can be prosecuted for, and for things like there's confusion about when you're in a state with an abortion ban, what can you do to help someone access care outside of the state? What can physicians within those states still do? That's just the biggest I think area of confusion.
Yeah. Janet, you want to add anything to that?
Just a little. I think that they nailed the biggies. But two things, I think. One is that abortion seekers don't necessarily understand that they do have the right to travel out of state. And if they're unable to, or if they choose not to, that providers will send medications into the banned states. And in many of the bans, the person who's having the abortion isn't subject to prosecution or punishment. But I think an important thing to keep in mind, and I know Amy and all of the people in the clinic see this all the time, even with this misunderstanding that maybe they will go to jail, people still seek abortions, and they're going to keep seeking abortions. And so I think that's one of the things that is amazing about the work that Whole Women's Health Alliance and other providers do. They're still helping these people. They're coming even though they're terrified, and they're giving them a good abortion experience.
I think that we've talked about that over the years, that like abortion bans don't change the need for abortion. They don't do anything to address prevention or anything. They just change how people can access care, but the need for abortion has existed since the beginning of time, right? And so what we're seeing now is people jumping through hoops, having to travel, maybe getting things through mail or whatever, but the need hasn't changed. And so the resilience of patients and the willingness of people to step forward and do what they need to do, no matter what the consequences might be, even if they don't understand them, and they're still willing to come and get the care because it's the care that they need to live the lives that they need to live.
So that's kind of a perfect segue if we just have you continue and share with us a little bit about what patients in banned states are experiencing right now when they try to access care. What are we seeing happen in our clinics?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misinformation, and as somebody who's worked in the messaging space around abortion for decades, like misinformation is a strategy. It's not by default, it's by design. That people are being made to be confused on purpose. That there's coverage in states, in banned states, of litigation, or there's coverage of legislation, and it's covered as though it's already law, even though it's something that's introduced. And so the way the press covers it makes people in those places think the laws already exist or thinks the laws are already being enforced. And that is very strategic on their part. And so what we have is a lot of misinformation, and it shows up in lots of different ways. Like there's fears about making referrals, like doctors in Texas or doctors in Mississippi or abortion funds or community clinics might be afraid of making a referral for an abortion because they've heard about aiding and abetting and they don't really know what it means. And so they just decide that it's too risky and decide not to. So part of what we have is what I will call complying in advance, right? So we have people who are complying with the framework of the law without necessarily understanding the law, because they're afraid and the fears have worked. There's, in SB 8 in Texas, there's a lot of things that were introduced. The aiding and abetting framework is one of them, but also like a bounty hunting kind of framework where there was this idea that people would be rewarded if they snitched on their neighbors or they turned somebody in. And even though that hasn't operationalized or happened, it worked to freeze people in a fear place, right? And so people have this belief that things might be more risky or that they might be more at risk than they actually are. So those things have worked to really crumble an infrastructure of referrals and information and accuracy. There's also robust funding for crisis pregnancy centers in not just Texas, but in many places in the country. Crisis pregnancy centers, I believe, outnumber legitimate real abortion clinics 4-1 is one of the last stats that I heard. It might even be worse than that. And so people have trouble discerning the difference. I mean, we've even run into this at Whole Women's Health in communities where we're offering medication abortion by mail, or we're opening a new clinic post Dobbs. People can't necessarily distinguish our name from a name that might be a crisis pregnancy center. Meta and other advertisers aren't restricting the way crisis pregnancy centers advertise in the internet, and so people are getting sent to those crisis pregnancy centers and getting given misinformation. And so there's just a whole lot of misinformation out there that people in banned states are navigating, and that misinformation is extending over to free states where abortion isn't banned anyway, right? Where people are like, what are my rights? Where can I go? Is this clinic a legitimate clinic? Is this clinic not a legitimate clinic? When you close clinics in, I believe it's 14 states where abortion is completely banned, and I think there's 3 or 4 more states where abortion is restricted at least up to 6 weeks. People lose the local clinic that they knew and loved. They knew a clinic in their community, whether it was a Whole Women's Health Alliance clinic in Texas, or whether it was a clinic in Mississippi, or a clinic in Alabama, or a clinic in Louisiana, and they don't know when they're traveling to a new state how to find the clinic like that in that new state. And so that by default really works to crumble the infrastructure of trust and referrals and communities that have been built over decades to serve the communities that we're talking about in banned states.
Marc, you want to add anything to that in terms of how much of the fear that she's talking about is rooted in actual law and how much stems from that uncertainty of misinformation?
Yeah, I think so much of it is rooted in uncertainty and misinformation. I love, like Whole Women's Health Alliance is committed to destigmatizing, combating stigma, but also now combating misinformation, because this is, I think, an area. And just as an example, Amy mentioned Texas's SB 8, which is just in case you don't know, SB 8 was a law that Texas enacted in 2021 that banned abortion at 6 weeks, 6-week abortion ban. Unlike all of the previous abortion bans, it was not enforced. It was not a criminal ban. It was not enforced by any state officials. It was enforced solely through these private lawsuits that people could bring. And I led Homes Health and Homes Health Alliance were the lead plaintiffs in the federal case that I led to challenge that law. And yet, even though it's famously a law that is enforced through these civil lawsuits, I hear all the time people say, "Oh, I'm afraid that someone's going to turn me in to the police for violating SB 8 or for aiding and abetting an abortion." And it's not a criminal law. There are no criminal penalties, but because the law is out there, and maybe we shouldn't be saying vigilante, maybe we shouldn't be saying bounty hunting, maybe that sort of adds to that the thought that people are going to be turning you into the police, but that's not the way it works, right? It works by filing these private lawsuits. So, and there's even more confusion around SB 8 around what exactly people think. They hear aiding and abetting, right? And they think, oh, if I do anything associated with abortion at all, I'm guilty of aiding and abetting an abortion under SB 8. Well, first of all, guilty, right? You're not guilty of anything. There's not a criminal law, right? But also the aiding and abetting provision in SB 8 only applies to abortions that actually violate SB 8, and those are abortions that are happening in Texas.
Right.
SB 8 only applies to physicians licensed in Texas providing abortions in Texas. Guess how many of those there are? None. So you're not aiding and abetting anything that's happening in Texas because it isn't happening in Texas. So that's some of the
That's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. So let's shift a little bit and talk about some patient stories. Can you give us a couple of stories that relate to this travel and people being confused? And patient stories are just always so impactful. So share a couple with us, Amy.
I was just thinking about this, like complying in advance and the chilling effect, and just like the general public's challenge to discern between legislation that's introduced, a bill that's being debated, a law that's passed, and a law that's enforced, right? These are very different stages, right? Yet they get covered oftentimes by the press and reporters in ways that sound like they're already in effect. Not long after SB 8, but it was after Dobbs. So it was in 2022 sometime, we had Texas legislators starting to talk about travel bans and started to say they were going to try to pass something that was going to make it illegal for people to travel. And these bans were covered a ton in the news, and they're covered. Those of you who know me well know me. I have a very soft spot for saying yes to local news. People are like, "Oh, are you going to be on MSNBC or CNN?" Yeah, sure, I'll do those reports, but I want to be in the local TV station in Fort Worth, or I want to be in that local newspaper in Austin, like where people are reading. The local people who might be our patients are reading the information, because that's where I'm trying to change the misinformation. And so this story was covered in Fort Worth in a couple of local news stations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the abortion travel ban, and it was covered as though it was a law and it was going to be going into effect. And they did a lot of what ifs, right? And I am not exaggerating to say that every single patient canceled their appointment in our clinic in New Mexico the next day. Every single one. It was more than 20 people, because all of them had heard these local news coverages and thought it was going to be illegal for them to travel. They were super afraid to fly. They were super afraid to drive. They told us about imagining in their minds like a border checkpoint, which isn't illogical. There's border checkpoints all the way through Texas for immigration checkpoints, right? So they imagined being stopped and checked and profiled as they tried to travel to New Mexico. And so it took a lot for us to sort of undo that. Like the abortion funds were also hearing from patients canceling their appointments. So just sort of to say, hey, this isn't in effect, this isn't real, that, so it puts providers in a very different perspective as well, where we're, trying to educate people about what the law is, what it isn't, what their risk is, what their risk isn't. But people hear this and they freak out and they get super scared. And so that's a test example. I've recently spent quite a bit of time in our Minnesota clinic. Our Whole Women's Health of Minnesota is the abortion provider that is in Minneapolis, right in the middle of where the ICE surge has been for the last few months. It has affected many of the patients we're there to serve. It's affected our staff, many of whom were not safe to come into work and were, shuttered in their houses and during the surge. And so it was a real challenge to keep our services consistent and available, which I'm proud to say we were able to do. It took some of us coming in and actually, putting scrubs on and seeing patients so that the clinic could be there for the community. And in the time that I was there, I saw a lot of patients coming from other states. And I think about and locally, right? Like, and all the vendors locally who were coming in were talking about their experience being detained or pulled over or whatever. But a couple really stick out. One is a Latino couple who came from Minot, North Dakota, which is 8 hours away from Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there's a military base in Minot, and he was an active military. And they were Latino, and they, not only does the military not cover her abortion care, they were married. It also doesn't cover the IUD that she wanted because she is coming to Minnesota for the care that she can no longer get in North Dakota. North Dakota bans abortion, so they had to travel into Minnesota 8 hours each way, but they had to come into Minneapolis as a Latino couple knowing what's happening with the ICE surge. And so just like how many times that compounded their abortion experience and the variables they had to navigate. They wanted to stay in Minnesota overnight to make sure everything went okay before they went back to North Dakota. And so just those multiple variables that they dealt with about, what do I do afterward? What if, how can I get follow-up care in North Dakota? Like, what do I need to tell people or not tell people? A lot of those questions. I had a young nursing student who came from Iowa who was over 6 weeks, and so Iowa bans abortion at 6 weeks, and so she came in. Similarly, she had unfortunately gone to a crisis pregnancy center in Iowa before she came to us and was very traumatized from the experience she had at the crisis pregnancy center, and she was worried about her rights, worried about the law, worried about, like, can I have an abortion here? What happens when I go back to my community? Like, she was thinking about a medication abortion, and then she got scared and wanted to do a procedure because she didn't want to have to take medications in a state where abortion was banned, et cetera. And I mean, I had a physician from Nebraska. I had another young couple from from Wisconsin, people just asking all these questions. And this is just the day-to-day of the Minnesota clinic, is that there's that diversity of people coming from all different states, and us as providers needing to know a little bit about what are the laws in Wisconsin, what are the laws in Nebraska, what are the laws in Iowa. I expected people from the Dakotas and Iowa. I didn't expect. I saw more than one patient from Nebraska and more than one patient from Wisconsin, because even though Wisconsin has opened up their abortion restrictions post-Dobbs. For a while it was banned, and now it's available. The only clinics in Wisconsin are in Milwaukee, and without going through a geography lesson of the Midwest, Milwaukee's on the opposite side of Wisconsin from Minnesota, right? So there's a whole bunch of Wisconsin that has no providers, and so those folks are coming to Minnesota. So there's just a couple stories of, like, that's just on a regular day of what we're navigating.
And those patients are navigating that fear and confusion that we're talking about. Let's shift the conversation a little bit more to talk about an understanding of what providers can legally say and do when patients ask for help. Marc, you drafted a memo in December of 2025 titled "Texas Law Does Not Prohibit Abortion Referral or Counseling," and you've already mentioned this. So even now, many providers still worry that referring a patient for an abortion could expose them to liability, especially under that aiding and abetting provision. So can you explain why referrals a little bit more, unpack that a little bit more? You've mentioned it. Let's talk about it a little more. Why referrals and counseling about out-of-state abortions are not prohibited under Texas law.
Yeah, so I can unpack a few different laws, and I've mentioned SB8. This is what's confusing about Texas law is it's not enough for it to have one abortion ban. It's got to have layers upon layers of abortion bans, and they all create their own
Do
confusion.
it bigger in Texas, right?
Yes.
Not to be outdone.
And I am a Texan, native Texan, so I can say this. All right, so we mentioned SB8, and I'll just recap SB8 again. SB8 is a six-week abortion ban that applies to abortions provided by Texas licensed physicians. So it has to be a physician providing the abortion. The physician has to be licensed in Texas, and the abortion has to be provided in Texas. If all of that is true and it's post 6 weeks, then it violates SB8. But those are generally not happening except for medical emergencies, right? The only abortions that are happening are within the medical emergency exception. So helping someone get an abortion in another state is not a violation of SB8 because that's not an abortion in Texas. Texas does also have now criminal bans in effect, or at least one criminal ban in effect. The trigger ban, which is the total ban, went into effect after Dobbs in 2022. I'm just going to read the text of the ban for you so you see exactly what the ban prohibits. The ban says, a person may not knowingly perform, induce, or attempt an abortion. That's the text of the ban. I'll read it one more time. A person may not knowingly perform, induce, or attempt an abortion. It doesn't say anything about referring for abortions, counseling about abortions, traveling for an abortion. And Texas law can't apply to abortions that happen in another state. And you think about it, the analogy that I think about is if you're a Texan, at least when I was growing up in Texas, you couldn't gamble in Texas. Now I think there might be a few casinos in Texas. I'm not sure. But you could fly to Vegas. You could go to New Orleans. You could gamble. Perfectly legal there. And when you're in Texas, you could plan a trip to New Orleans. You could plan a trip to Vegas. You could pay for your friends to go to Vegas with you. All perfectly legal because Texas law only bans gambling within Texas. It's the same about abortion. It doesn't ban going somewhere out to another state where it's legal in that state, including talking about it, referring, counseling about it within Texas. It's just not within the text of the ban. And as Amy said, there have been proposals to ban those types of things. But A, they haven't passed, and B, we still have a First Amendment in this country. And so there are lots of even if a ban like that did get passed, I think there would be some challenges to it in court. So those are the two main laws. I mean, I do want to touch on, I know there is a general aiding and abetting provision under Texas law, and there's also like a general conspiracy provision under Texas law. And those laws similarly only apply if you are aiding and abetting something that actually is unlawful, right? So if what you're doing is attempting or helping someone do something that is lawful in the state where it's happening, then the Texas aiding and abetting provision wouldn't apply. You can't conspire to do something that is legal, right? That's not a conspiracy. For it to be a conspiracy,
That's a good billboard right there.
Right. For it to be a
Right.
criminal conspiracy, you have to be conspiring to violate the law. And if what you're doing doesn't violate the law, then you're not liable for conspiracy either. So I think those are the other law to touch on. Texas does have this new House Bill 7 that took effect in December. And House Bill 7 prohibits the mailing, transportation. Well, let me just say, before I read it, House Bill 7 doesn't change anything about referrals or counseling. It still doesn't say anything about it. What it prohibits is mailing, delivering, prescribing, or providing medication abortion in Texas. So that's the other thing I just want to say is looking so that was a lot about Texas, but looking across the United States, how many doctors have been charged since Dobbs for referring or counseling about abortion? As far as I know, zero. Nowhere in the United States. How many doctors have been charged for providing abortion care? As far as I know, it's only a couple who have been accused of shipping medication abortion into a banned state. But in terms of actually providing care based on a state's medical emergency, or any of that other kind of care, I'm not aware of any that have been charged post-Dobbs. The only person who has been charged with violating an abortion ban within their own state that I'm aware of is a midwife who has been charged in Texas and basically has been accused of running abortion clinics. And I represent her, and I can tell you she did not run abortion clinics. So those charges are being fought right now. But doctors are not being charged, and other healthcare providers for referring, for providing care under medical emergency exceptions. It's just not happening. So there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of overcompliance.
So thank you. Let's have Janet jump in here from a compliance perspective.
Yeah.
Providers often feel caught between the law and the fear of potential consequences. How can providers distinguish between a real legal risk and the chilling effect created by this uncertainty?
Right. So I wish I could say, oh, no problem. Easy. There's lines here. But it's a little more complicated than that, partly because when providers are thinking about the risks that they're willing to take on, they aren't just thinking about, am I going to have a claim in a court be successful against me? Am I going to have to pay money? Am I going to get convicted of a criminal offense? Am I going to have an action successful against my license? They have additional fear about those things even starting. Am I going to be charged with a criminal offense? Is there going to be an action started against my license? How am I going to defend myself? Who's going to pay for my lawyers? And so it's difficult to give a one-size-fits-all answer to that. But I will say that I think the two things that we as lawyers can help with is to make sure that people really do understand what laws apply to them. It's just like the story Amy was saying, for all the patients out there who think something has happened, the providers are going to be confused about, is it the law? Is it in effect? Is it not in effect? And then also to try and kind of put this into perspective, right? Is this high risk, medium risk, low risk, very low risk? And I think going back to what Marc just said, based on our experience so far, referrals and counseling are probably in a very low risk category. And then other behavior, mailing, advertising, that you're providing medications into banned states, that's going to be in a higher risk. And so the main thing is to help providers put it into perspective based on what we know so far, and then help them make the decisions that are right for them. And when I say them, I mean, if it's a clinic situation, the providers and the other staff all trying to come together to decide what risks they want to accept.
Thank you. Amy, bring this back to the patient experience and tell us why referrals from trusted providers are so important for patients who are navigating this abortion access.
Yeah, well, prior to Dobbs, the majority of our referrals came from trusted other providers in the community, friends, family, previous patients, right? And part of that was that, you know, Whole Women's Health had built a reputation in the communities, and people referred to us, right? But when you find out about an abortion provider from your doctor, from a friend, from a family member, you have a level of trust that's really different from if you just Google something or you ask ChatGPT, like, where should I go, right? And so that gets crumbled if people are afraid to refer, or if people are worried about that aiding and abetting framework, or they have been told by hospital administration that they're not allowed to make a referral, or they're not allowed to counsel about abortion. You know, some doctors or providers are being, you know, told things through an intermediary that isn't accurate, because that person is assessing the risk of an institution, whether it might be a university or it might be a hospital system. And so their hands are tied in ways, or it may be, I've seen, you know, abortion supporter organizations, abortion funds be restricted by reticence on the board, or reticence of a donor or a funder, right, of their exposure. So they're kind of removed from a patient, but it affects that agency or that organization's ability to do their work and to make a referral. And it's really affected a lot of patient referrals, and people's ability to trust, and people's ability to distinguish legitimate, high-quality provider from a crisis pregnancy center. Those are some of the ways that people knew, like, oh, my friend went there, or my family member went there, or my doctor recommends this place. So that's really affected a lot of people a lot.
It adds to that uncertainty that they are navigating.
Yeah.
Definitely. Janet, you've spent decades helping providers navigate restrictive legal environments. This is an interesting question to me. What does smart compliance look like in 2026?
Yes, well, it's not that much different now than it was before Dobbs, but in a nutshell, you need to understand what laws apply. It's something we've touched on several times. What is the legal landscape? Are you up to date with what laws actually apply? And then understanding where there is room for provider discretion, right? Where can you push a little, or where is it pretty black and white? Can't go there without some pretty significant risk. And then taking into account what factors might increase your risk or mitigate your risk, right? Like even who the local prosecutor is if you're looking at a criminal ban, and then trying to come up with the right balance of how to serve as many patients as possible without taking on a risk that you or the rest of your team are going to be uncomfortable with. And, you know, we see providers all over the map with this. We see the Shield Law providers, they're all in. And then we see others that have pulled back because the risks are just more than they can feel comfortable with in their practices.
So you mentioned Shield Law.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. What should we understand about Shield Laws?
Yes, but let me go back to my last answer just and touch on something Amy
Sure.
mentioned, which is what I described is providers outside of the hospital setting. Providers in hostile states in hospitals may be really not able to make these decisions much on their own because of policies and decisions of the hospital. And we've seen that in Texas with very, very bad results. So the Shield Law providers, I will say most of them are getting lots and lots of legal advice, and they understand the risks and they're going for it when they mail medications into hostile states, partly because they want the Shield Laws to be tested to see what the boundaries are, so that other providers, once they understand how this is going to work, might be willing to jump in and also provide abortions. One of the things that we're seeing, though, with the Shield Laws is the providers under the shield laws need to comply with their state laws. That's a very important factor. And the other thing that I think we really need to keep an eye on, and Marc may be able to say more about this than I can, is the fact of the shield law providers drives the antis crazy. And because they are making abortion available in hostile ban states. And so I think there's a risk that there's going to be some kind of sneaky federal actions to go after the shield law providers. And obviously, we've all heard about the Comstock Act perhaps taking effect, but I think there are other ways that we might see hostile federal administration actions against shield laws.
I'm just going to step in with layperson privilege here. 1 second. Isn't that, you like that? Layperson privilege? And just define what a shield law is for the people who might be listening who don't know. So there's like 17 different states that have shield laws at least. They're all different. It's not my understanding none of them are written the same. Some of them, there's a shield law in Virginia. There's one in Minnesota that protect like my doctors who are seeing patients in clinics, right, who might be patients traveling in, who might be licensed in Texas and Minnesota. It protects that doctor for seeing that patient in Minnesota. That's sort of like a basic shield law. And then there are like what I think of as like the most robust shield laws, which are a smaller number of states like Massachusetts, New York, California, Vermont, Rhode Island. I could list, I think there's 8 of them that actually have much more protection. Washington, Oregon, I think are on that list, that allow a doctor in that shield law state to mail pills to people, whether they're in ban states or free states, and that patient is considered a patient in the state where the doctor is. So it's like a Massachusetts doctor can see patients telemedically from Massachusetts, whether the patient's in Texas or Mississippi or wherever, and that patient is considered a Massachusetts patient. The laws protect the doctor's exposure, don't always protect the patient in the same way, but this is the shield law that allows people to mail meds into states where abortion is banned. I just want to be clear, Whole Woman's Health Alliance doesn't offer shield law provision as one of our services because our exposure is pretty big. We have brick and mortar clinics in a way that would make us mailing into banned states pretty risky because they could just come and, show up at our brick and mortar clinics. So just wanted to give that little caveat because I think shield laws get discussed in ways and people oftentimes mix up shield law provision and telemedicine abortion and there's telemedicine abortion that's done in states where abortion is legal, which is what our organization does. And then there's the shield law provision that is also legal, but is doing a different approach in mailing. So I don't know if I did it right as a layperson, but I think it's important to just, because it's really robust, creative growth area in abortion care landscape now. And it is one of the primary reasons that the number of abortions has not only not gone down, it's gone up since Dobbs in this country, because this access to abortion pills has made abortion actually more accessible post Dobbs than it was beforehand, which is like, what? And that, I would agree with you, Janet, is driving the anti-abortion people absolutely crazy. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, well, in that vein of thinking, Marc, tell us what trends are you seeing in how states are testing the boundaries of abortion enforcement?
So, basically piggybacking on all of that, what is making the antis, I mean, Janet, you're right that the antis hate shield laws, but what they hate more than anything is the abortion pill. They hate medication abortion. And so what we are seeing, the national trend that we are seeing right now is every possible attack on medication abortion it's just a multi-pronged attack. And right, Amy's right. The number of abortions has gone up since Dobbs, not down. And today, almost 2/3 of abortions in the United States are through pills. Every month in the United States, 15,000 people in states with abortion bans, 15,000 people a month are accessing medication abortion in states with abortion bans. So that is what's driving them
Haha.
absolutely
Sorry.
bonkers, right? So, we saw Texas HB 7, which is really a direct attempt to counteract Shield laws, and it allows purports to allow lawsuits against someone who is alleged to provide medication abortion into Texas. We're seeing other states considering right now the state legislatures are in session, and there's a lot of copycat bills, one way or another, that states are considering passing. There's a lawsuit right now that has been filed under HB 7 against my client. We're defending against that lawsuit. We have seen a couple of arrest warrants issued for by Louisiana or within Louisiana for doctors who Louisiana accuses of mailing medication abortion into the state. There's also been some civil lawsuits that have been filed by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton against some doctors who he accuses of being Shield law providers. So, that is, I think, that's the area that we're seeing, and really, I think we are going to. So, Louisiana Attorney General Liz Murrill has said that she is going to file litigation to try to challenge at least California and New York's Shield laws. She is seeking the extradition of two doctors who she accuses of mailing medication abortion into Louisiana. She's seeking their extradition into Louisiana, and those states have denied extradition based on the Shield laws. And so she says she's going to file a lawsuit. She said that a few weeks ago and hasn't done it yet, so I don't know exactly when she's going to do it. But I think that's that type of interstate, one state versus another is, I think, where we're going to see this heading. But yeah, I think that's the trend. But we're not seeing any changes on referrals and counseling.
That's also an important piece to keep reiterating. That's not happening, right? I do want to say we're coming towards the end. So if any of our attendees have questions, please throw those into the Q&A and we'll get to those. As I'm watching for those questions, I'm going to keep asking a couple of questions. Yes, Marc.
Are you gonna ask about FDA? Because I want to make sure we get
I
into
am.
FDA. Great.
I am.
Great. Because that was the other part of my answer before.
Yes. So right now, Whole Women's Health Alliance is engaged in litigation with the FDA in partnership with Center for Reproductive Rights. Either Amy and Marc, either of you can talk, or both of you. Why is this kind of targeted litigation so important right now for protecting abortion access nationwide?
Go ahead, Marc.
Well, let me just say that the rest of the prong of the attack on medication abortion is we're seeing the antis and states like Texas and Florida and Missouri, and Louisiana that have filed litigation against FDA, trying to force the FDA to roll back some of the loosening of the restrictions that it had on mifepristone. So post-COVID, FDA started to allow mifepristone to be mailed, and we're seeing states suing mifepristone to try to undo that, so that could have, if they were to win those lawsuits, that would not just affect people in states with abortion bans. That would affect organizations like Whole Women's Health Alliance who provide medication abortion into states that don't have abortion bans. And so, Amy, do you want to pick it up from there?
Well, so our lawsuit, Whole Women's Health Alliance, via the FDA, is here in Virginia, and it's with the Center for Reproductive Rights representing us, and it's on behalf of two other states besides ours, and we're trying to basically add protections for our states so that if there is a national restriction, it doesn't apply to our states. But also, we're calling into question the restrictions on mifepristone writ large, calling into question whether they're based on scientific evidence or medical fact, or if the medication is being discriminated against because of the political nature of the meds. It's been put through a very different path, a very rigorous path that actually has nothing to do with safety outcomes. It's safer than Tylenol. Yet it has all these restrictions of a doctor-only pharmacist prescription, all this kind of nonsense that isn't based on medical evidence. So we've introduced a lot of things into the lawsuit in addition to trying to make sure that Virginia and Kansas and Missouri would have these, Montana, Kansas, and Virginia would have these protections if there was something done at the federal level, but also just really calling into question the restrictions on MIFI in general. And so we're the lawyers know more about this. We're kind of stuck. We've been in the court system here in Virginia, the federal court system here in Virginia for some time, and kind of waiting on a decision. And the courts asked if they could sort of not throw the case out, but whatever it's called. And we said, no, we want to keep it active. And so we're kind of just waiting to see what will happen. And I think they're looking around to see what's going to happen in Louisiana with the other MIFI case and other cases. These judges kind of are watching each other to see what's going to happen.
So do you want to just speak for a brief moment, because we're really getting towards the end?
Yeah.
Stigma, silence, and misinformation are such important weapons for the other side.
Yeah.
And our mission at Whole Women's Health Alliance is to eradicate that stigma, to break the silence, to demystify and correct the misinformation. Talk a little bit about how conversations like this and our listeners can engage in helping us in that stigma eradication, misinformation busting effort.
Yeah, I would just, anybody can opt into these conversations. Like, all of us should be talking about, not only talking about abortion in general, and don't leave the sort of stigma comments that people make, in your communities and in your families or in your conversations go unnoticed. When people drop some of those comments and use it as an opportunity to engage in a conversation, like when somebody says, I'm pro-choice, but I'd never have an abortion. Like, use that as a conversation starter, right? Not an ender. But I would also just lift up talking about abortion as a positive, talking about abortion through a moral framework of that abortion is a moral decision. Abortion, access to safe abortion is fundamental to equality, is fundamental to autonomy. It is part of a human right. It's not just women's rights. Millions of people have benefited from access to safe abortion in our country. I have yet to meet a woman who got pregnant on her own. There's always somebody else involved, and access to safe abortion benefits families writ large. I would also just put a shout out to these two attorneys, and I want to point out that it's not, any attorney can tell me what's risky about providing abortion. Like, you don't even freaking have to go to law school to be like, oh, providing abortion might be risky, right? It is a special kind of attorney that can help you do the work that you want to do in your mission and vision, like us, and figure out how we can keep doing that work despite the restrictions, how we may continue and how we shall continue to do that work, even though there's more regulation, more restriction, more fear. And both Marc and Janet are experts at helping us figure out, how can we still see people? How can we be safe? How can our staff still work and do the work that they love, even though abortion's been banned in their state, et cetera? And I just want to put that shout out, because not all lawyers are going to help you figure out how you can continue to do the work you love, even though it might be risky.
Thank you. That's so important. And just as a closing thought, one sentence response from each of you. What does know your rights mean in 2026? And how can that knowledge empower people rather than paralyze them? I don't care who goes first.
I'll go first. I'll be brief. Just that people still have access to abortion, and there are resources and people out there to help people get them.
I'll say knowing your rights doesn't mean that you have to know everything, but it means don't assume. Don't assume that what you want to do is unlawful or that you can't do it. go check out resources and find out how to do it.
Yeah, I would just say you're not alone, right? Like there are millions of people that have had abortions, and we all know somebody and love somebody who's needed an abortion in their lifetime. And abortion is accessible, and we can still get access to safe abortion even though it's been restricted. So I think that people need to realize that they're not alone. And that fact that there's more abortions post-Dobbs than there were before, I think, is something everybody should be talking about.
If I
Yes.
can say one more sentence, knowing your rights also means accessing abortiondefensenetwork.org and
That's
get
true.
obtaining resources that way, as I said
Yeah.
at the outset, if
Yeah.
you need.
Thank you. So I want to thank all three of you for your expertise and your insights. This is a moment where confusion is widespread, and accurate information is one of the most powerful tools we have. So we hope this conversation helped clarify what the law actually says and what patients and providers need to know moving forward. I do want to invite Tammy back just for a brief moment for a call to action and a closing.
Thank you, Sonia. And thank you so much, Amy, Marc, and Janet, for your incredible conversation today. And thank you, everyone, who joined us today. As a follow-up to our webinar, we have a list of resources right here. It's also going to be in the chat and also is emailed to you as a registered webinar attendee in the reminder email. There are also, we just wanted to remind you that Home Women's Health Alliance is celebrating 10 years, and we're incredibly excited about that. It's not only a decade of transforming abortion care, and our anniversary isn't just about looking back, it's about looking forward and what comes next. This fall, we boldly launched our $1 million 10-year anniversary campaign to help plan, secure, and sustain our work for the decade ahead, but we can't do it without you. And there's 3 ways that you can help today. One is by making a donation. There's the link on the screen here, also in the chat. And you can follow us on social media. You can visit our campaign website, which again is available there. And their campaign website is going to have a wealth of information, including upcoming events, as well as opportunities to volunteer and stay involved. So again, thank you so much for being part of this movement and for standing with that Whole Women's Health Alliance, not just today, but as we boldly step into our future together. We're grateful for your continued support, and we hope that you'll see you in the future at one more of our 10th anniversary celebration events. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.